And
Good.
speeding.
Steve Arrington, take one. All right, man. How you doing?
Doing well, Nelson. How are you, brother?
So, if I say to you, I'm from another planet. I just arrived on planet Earth, and there's this thing called funk. How would you describe funk?
I'd say funk is a. I'd say funk is a little bit of the blues, a little bit of rock and roll, blended in with an attitude that's a little faster than the blues, a little slower than the rock and roll, right in the middle, with some extra hefty. Just went through the civil rights, freedom, people integrating a lot more. I'd say funk is the place where everything came together and freedom was really touched on for the first time, and it showed up in the music.
It's funny. The word freedom comes up a lot in discussing funk and space.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how someone said the rhythm of funk is
Mm-hmm.
a different rhythm than what came before.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the rhythms of funk?
The rhythms of funk, I don't know, it seems to be that pocket was a lot more important. In the blues and earlier R&B records, it was more about the middle, it was about the chords, it was more about the top part of the melody and the vocals. Funk made things, James Brown especially made things about the groove. So funk borrowed from the blues in starting into the groove, but funk made the groove important. Funk made it the groove be like today. Hip hop music is all about the beat. They don't even say they're making music, they say they're making beats. Funk started that. The importance of the beat. James Brown.
That's really, really, really good. If you had someone ask you, what artist do you define funk? What would you say?
James Brown, and then Sly Stone. Sly Stone represents more of that freedom where it came to cultures blending and coming together. James Brown for me represents the freedom, making the groove and not having to compromise the blackness of the music and the culture. James Brown just made it cool to be funky and cool to be black, and then Sly made it cool to have a social impact with the world. That's how I see Sly.
Now, growing up in Dayton, what was your introduction to this kind of black music? What do you really first time recognize that there's something different from, let's say, gospel or traditional R&B?
I go back to James Brown. Cold Sweat. I remember my mother and my family, we was into There Was a Time. My parents used to have their parties, like they'd have birthday parties, and we'd have like birthday week. Somebody would have a birthday coming up, and it would be like birthday week, birthday double week. And I was a little guy, and I would remember the record labels on the 45s, and I was like the DJ. And they were fascinated because I couldn't tell you the name of the song by reading it, but I knew the name of the song by the label. And so I remember James Brown, There Was a Time, and then Cold Sweat. It broke the tempo down some, and it was more about the drums and the groove. That caught my ears, and everybody in Dayton, you had to have your Cold Sweat beat together if you was a drummer, which is my first instrument. If you didn't have your Cold Sweat beat together, people wasn't feeling you. And then the next beat you had to have together was your Make It Mellow, Tighten Up. You had to have your Tighten Up together. And so through James Brown, uh, Tighten Up, Archie Bell and the Drills, it became more groove oriented because we were coming out of the doo-wop era where you had, the Delphonics and groups like that. We were coming out of that, and Brown and then Sly did Sex Machine, and it was just a rap after that, man. Yeah, absolutely.
What's your musical training? How did you become a musician?
Well, I've loved music is just all my life. That's all I remember. I took drum lessons for a while. Um, Actually, I studied with the drummer that played with Bill Doggett, saxophone with Bill Doggett in Toledo, um, for a little bit when I was with this lounge band called the Murphys. And
How old are you then?
I was 19 when I studied with Ben. I can't remember his last name now. But I took some drum lessons as a little kid for about a year, but mostly studying, listening to records. And then I went back actually in my 40s. I went back to study theory and things like that to, expand my music knowledge. But in the early days, it was mostly listening to records. And I eat, sleep, and drink music. And I have, as a little kid, I just always have.
When did you become aware that the area you lived in, the Dayton area, was a musical hotbed? When did that kind of realize that there's so much music coming out here?
Well, the Ohio players hit. And I remember Payne came on the radio and we heard Payne and Junie was just doing his thing and we heard the funk on that joint and it was like, who is that? And that's the Ohio players. Now, at that time, there was so many bands on every block. We had talent shows and Battle of the Bands, and they were serious in Dayton. After the Ohio players hit, everybody even got more serious because not only did the Ohio players have hit records, they were totally unique. Nobody sounded like those guys, and it just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And so being original was very important to the rest of us. And so we all started working on originals versus just doing covers. And we started writing, and the players were the catalyst for us taking that serious. And then all of a sudden we realized there's a lot of hot bands in this small town, Dayton, Ohio. And then obviously we all started to hit after the players, the rest of the bands, Slave, Lakeside, Phaso, Dayton, Roger, Zap, Shirley Murdoch. I mean, it just boom, something seriously happened, and we took it serious. Lakeside, everybody was kicking.
Did you now, Chris? Did A&R guys start coming to town? How did the whole talk about your relationship with Slave first, since that was being a big group.
Yes.
Were people looking for Dayton bands, or how did that happen?
Well, I heard about that, but after high school, I went out to the West Coast. I went to San Francisco. There was a trend, and Lakeside were one of the important people to start this. Lakeside went to LA to make it, along with another band, Platypus, who are maybe lesser known than some of the other bands, but just as important in a lot of ways. And some of the writers from Platypus were a part of the Solar Sound. We're doing a lot of writing with the Solar camp. And of course, Lakeside was on Solar as well. I went to San Francisco. I didn't go to LA. I went to San Francisco and started playing with the Escovedos, starting with Coke Escovedo and then starting to play with Pete and Sheila Escovedo and did a tour with them. Now, prior to going to San Francisco, Slave was a part of the people from Slave was in a group called the Young Mystics. That was Mark Adams, that was Floyd Miller, Thomas Lockett, and those guys went on to be Slave with Stevie Washington, Mark Hicks, Danny Webster, and Ray Turner, and so on and so forth. After they did their first album,
That's the one that Slide on.
that's one with Slide on it. They were making a drum chair move with Tim Dozier, who happened to be one of the drummers for my brother's band that I used to listen to when I was a little kid. He left the band and they called me up because I had played with the Young Mystics prior to going to California. I came back to the band and I think we fit so well because Adams and I, and him being a bass player, Mark Adams, and I being a drummer, we had made that lock before I left Dayton, and it was just a perfect fit when I came back. And so, we grew up together in Roth High School. I went out to LA, I should say San Francisco, sort of following what Lakeside was doing, heading to the West Coast, and Platypus, coming back, being a part of Slave, and that's how I hooked in.
I'm curious how playing Latin music or playing number one, for them to take you in as a drummer,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty impressive because the Latin music is always about percussion and rhythm.
Yes.
I'm curious how much that affected your playing when you came back, having that hearing those other patterns that were not like traditional R&B patterns.
Yeah, it totally did, and you can hear it in a song off of the Showtime album, Spice of Life, Spice of My Life. You can hear that Latin influence. Um, it changed a lot because it broadened my sense of scope in what to play, and it made me more tasteful as a drummer, and it also made me, I'm saying tasteful, not to overplay, because with the Escovedos you had Sheila playing timbales, you had Pete on conga, and Bill Summers was playing conga as well, and you had it was a 17-piece salsa band. I mean, it was crazy. It was like two guitar players. So as a drummer, you couldn't overplay because there were so many people putting the subdivisions playing between the cracks, you know. And so it taught me how to sit in the pocket, drive a band, but not overplay. So when I got with Slave, with Mark Adams doing a lot of movement on the bass, I just locked in a pocket and had some circular motion going. I'd do a little cadence while Mark was just peppering on the bass. It was a good combination. So I'd say more than anything, I learned how not to overplay yet still drive the band, because it took a lot to drive a 17-piece salsa band.
When one thing that's come up in discussion, your drumming, people have used the word circular.
Mm-hmm.
You used it just. What does that mean in terms of, if you can explain it to a layman? What are we feeling?
Well, a cadence, you know, like at that time I used a lot of hi-hat stuff, and what I would do, I would play a cadence and it would just continue. I would turn it over at the same place, and it would turn into a melodic part, like in Just a Touch of Love. Doom 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 zoom, copy you do, boom 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 doom zoom. You know, that hi-hat became a part of the melody, and it sat well with the bass. It answered the bass parts, and so people started to hear that, and it started to become a pattern in my style. Same thing in Stellar Funk. And so so people said, you got a circular motion. Same thing in Way Out too, where I started bringing the toms into play, but still had that hi-hat in there as well.
So Slave, where do you think Slave fits into it? It was I guess in the cosmology of funk. Where are you guys? What do you think you guys as a unit brought to the party?
I think melodically we took things in a new place as we drew from the funk of George and the guitar nastiness of Sly. We sort of blended it and added some melodic perspective of maybe a Stevie and more jazz perspectives, not totally like an Earth, Wind and Fire, where the middle was very jazzy and very arranged. We borrowed a little bit from everybody, but kept it stomping at the same time. And I think our place was, we were jazzy, we were R&B, we were even a little bit avant-garde, but we was funky, yet it wasn't dirt cheap funk, but it was. You know, we were sort of like a blend of a lot of things. And then you had nasty bass with the vocals soaring, and this jazzy, but not too jazzy in the middle. I liked the blend we had.
Talk about Mark Adams.
Yes.
And what he brought to bass. He had a distinct style.
Yeah. Mark, he was effortless in his playing. He played a lot of notes and made it sound like he didn't, because it was always in pocket and it always made sense. He never showed out. You never got the sense, oh, he's just showing off. He played emotionally. That's what I dug about his playing. I remember his bass lines. I remember I remember the things he played around the bass lines, you know, the embellishments. He drew you in, And then he had a sound like no other. You heard the fret noise. You heard the bite. It growled. It was fat. It was in your face. Mark Adams was special. He is special. I think he's one of the greats. I don't think he gets the note that's like maybe the great Larry Graham, who started thumping and popping, and Bootsy, and maybe even Verdine. You know, he loved Verdine. He also loved this bass player Mel Shatner, Grand Funk Railroad. We was Grand Funk Railroad fans, and he used to be off in the Adams, borrowed from that too. But Adams' sound was like no other. It was effortless, emotional bass playing, and it was every time. I mean, it was just every time.
People mentioned this that he would do these slides in between.
Yes.
It seemed like that was that became a trademark. Well, you could hear him play a mile away.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he had licks that you knew. He had licks that he'd bring back to the table that were signature licks, while he consistently explored into new territory. But he always kept the stings. We called them planks. He was doing that. He did the rubs. We called them rubs. He was doing that. And he kept those things while he continued to explore into new territory. Mark Adams he was fun too. His bass playing was fun. It sounded like he was having a good time, and he was.
So you joined the band as a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
At what point, and how did the transition into becoming a vocalist happen?
Well, I sang. I never was known as a singer in Dayton, only a drummer. I sang with this lounge band, the Murphys, and Tie Yellow Ribbon. You know, doing all the On My Way to Vegas tunes. You know what I'm saying? Lounge music, and I started singing. I used to sing Bad Bad Leroy Brown. But then we also sang, like, I remember Tuesday Heartbreak with Stevie Wonder. So I started singing away from Dayton. It was out of Toledo. I came back to Dayton and got with this group. Like I said, you know, we did the Young Mystics thing and went out to California. Still didn't really sing. Did a little background vocals with Coke Escovedo. Came back to Dayton, and I remember Slave then moved to Jersey, and we started grooving. And they said, "Hey, sing a little something," because Tim Dozier sang with the group, the other drummer, and I started singing, and it's like, "Okay, we're feeling you." So we ended up. My first singing was on a song "Coming Soon." Off of the concept album, and then we went into the studio for Just a Touch of Love album. We had did the track, and the guy who was going to sing on it wasn't in the studio for a while, and so we all took a turn at the mic, and I was like, and they was like, "Man, we feeling that. It's kind of strange. Go work on it." So I came up with some vocals, came back into the studio the next day, came up with some lyrics, and it was like, we don't know what to do with that. It's funky, it's nice, but the intervals are kind of weird. And so they didn't know what to think about it at first, you know what I mean? And I just did my thing. And as a singer, I didn't have a lot of history and influences to do it a particular way. So I didn't have anything holding me back in terms of fitting into a mold. I just sang.
Because you say the intervals, there's a way you go across the notes that it's very unusual, and the tonality was very unusual. And you're saying you just made this is just something that you had no antecedents. It wasn't like you sounded like someone before you.
No. I was into listening to cats like Coltrane and Bird. I was just into listen. I would mimic solos, but I was doing that to myself. I tell you what I used to like. I used to like the Nestle's Quick commercial. No, Nestle's makes the very best chocolate. I used to like that when I was a little kid, and I used to be around the neighborhood and people would crack up. When I look back at it now, and I hear some of the things that I do, okay. Now maybe I got that from the Nestle's Quick joint. I don't know. You just never know. You know.
So you weren't
Something
like a church singer, none of
No,
that.
I only played drums. Mm-mm.
So you didn't really sing until you got. That's amazing.
Mm-mm. No, I didn't. I never was known as a singer, and that's why I caught everybody by surprise. It's like, yo, who is that? That's Steve Arrington. What? Dude, the drummer? It's always, been like that. And for me, for the longest time, I saw myself as a drummer that sang versus a singer that played drums. It took a while for that to happen because it caught me by. I mean, I went from playing drums all my life, and the next thing I know, I'm a front man with Slave, and I'm like, I don't know how to be a front man. I watched Charlie Wilson. I just watched I didn't know how to be a front man. I didn't know how to get the people. It was crazy, actually. It was like, next thing I know, I'm behind, and the drums are the least. I mean, everybody's out front doing their thing. The drums holding things down in the back. I was used to being in the background. So, and to end up being a lead singer was totally like a new trip for me, especially like, here we go, boom, you right out there, dude, here it is, and so I had to learn on the job. I watched Charlie Wilson, I watched JT from Kool and the Gang, I watched Larry Dodson. I mean, that's how I learned how to be a front man. I watched Roger Troutman.
It's on the job training.
I'd stay, I wouldn't go back to the hotel. I would stay at the shows and watch everybody and say, okay, so this is how you do this and this is how you do that. And what was wonderful about Slave, they allowed me to do that because they knew I didn't know.
So the Snapshot album, is that your first full album? Like you started out as a lead singer, or was there another album between that?
Just a touch. Well, let's see. The Watching You album, Stone Jam, I started to really step up more. But Stevie Washington, Kurt Jones, and Starlina Young left the band and formed Aura. So that left Danny Webster, myself, and also Floyd Miller. And I became more of the focal point at that point. And so Snapshot, the Stone Jam album, I should say, was where I started to really take off, but with Watching You. But it was the Showtime album with Snapshot and Wait For Me and those things where I became even more of the focal point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's one of my favorite albums from Mark. I think Mark Adams is incredible on that album.
Yes.
There's some amazing stuff on there.
Absolutely.
I was just one more thing about just how miking.
Mm-hmm.
There were was there a certain way you guys mic'd him, or is that just how he played?
It's how he played, and also you have two other things. Stevie Washington was a studio genius. I call him the precursor to Prince in terms of how Prince was able to get more out of the studio in R&B music than you were used to hearing. Stevie Washington thought like that. So he was very much into Mark Adams' sound, and he made sure we had these Sherwin Vega earthquakes, and he was really into making Mark's sound just special. Also, Jimmy Douglas, I have to also say, Jimmy Douglas as a producer really noticed what Adams was doing, and so he specialized. We figured not only was Adams a great bass player, but his sound was always a hook in the music. And so we featured him in terms of sitting him up in the mix, and he had such a special sound. But Stevie Washington, and if you listen to the first song that Aura did after leaving Slave, they did Are You Single? Stevie Washington played bass, and you heard a very similar sound in terms of just how it jumped out at you. Stevie Washington, tight dude, man. Stevie's bad.
So, at what point? So you're doing this music, and Slave is very successful,
Mm-hmm.
and you're having some of the biggest hits. Watching You in New York. You can't. It's the anthem in New York, right? The summertime can't come without Watching You playing, because it's such a great New York song. When you think about just sitting, watching people go by. At what point do you start to go and make the Hall of Fame move? When does that happen for you?
That was like 83. Slave, we had a series of bad management situations going on. We also started to see things differently, and I never was actually a member of the group. I was really just a sideman. I never actually signed to the group when I joined. I saw things going in a particular direction. And the thing about Slave is after the first album, there were always people coming and going. It just was a revolving door. And I think eventually, well, what happened to Slave? Well, people came and went, and usually it got better and better. But then you can't have a revolving door like that with it not eventually catching up. And that's really what happened. Stevie, Kurt, and Starr left, and Stevie Washington was the leader of the group. I felt then there's a serious crack in the wall, and they had left the group. That was a big hit, and I just sort of, after things developed more, I realized I needed to, make that move myself, and started Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame, and came out. The first joint with Way Out.
So now, talk about that, because that, in terms of funk and then sampling, that your band, that Hall of Fame stuff has been sampled up a million times. I mean, that Jay-Z record was Jermaine Dupri.
Yes,
it's all
Money
you.
Ain't a Thing.
Money Ain't a Thing. What's the concept of Hall of Fame versus Slave? It seems like it's even rawer.
Yes. Where Slave was sort of more textural in the middle, Hall of Fame, I went darker. I went more from a bluesier bass, and more sort of avant-garde, things like Betty Bye, which sort of had a Thelonious Monk sort of melody and guitar sort of thing to it. Whereas Slave, we had that sound that would give you more melodic, almost nursery rhymey melodies across the funk. Hall of Fame was more raw and rhythmical vocally, and where I was coming from than I was in Slave. And I was told, hey, you make another Watching You, that'll be opposite. I already did Watching You. I'm thinking differently now. So I went Way Out, Weak in the Knees. I wanted to do something that was more raw. And that whole blues bass, that whole gospel blues bass is in me. I feel that. And so it came out when I didn't have to share so many other people's ideas on we should do this versus that. I could make more decisions on what I wanted to do myself.
Talk about one of the records that people talk a lot about is Nobody Can Be You But You. Talk about that record. It's got an inspirational aspect as well as the raw funk.
Well, at that time, you had Earth, Wind, and Fire who were doing inspirational records. And for me, Sly, like You Can Make It If You Try, that track just used to kill me. Sly, Everyday People. There, at that time, you could say much more in a record. You had the party music, Jungle Boogie, by Kool and the Gang. You had party music, but you could also get a lot more in depth in terms of emotional music. Nobody Can Be You But You is like, it's a story about your uniqueness. It's a story about my own uniqueness. It's a story about everyone being completely unique. There's only one. And celebrating that and not trying to compare it, not trying to be someone else. In that lyric I said, don't get wrapped up in someone else's style because it'll change in a while. Find what you're all about and know just who you are without a doubt. Everyone's a star. Even Sly said that. That's my anthem of like appreciating everybody's gift and saying, you know what, be you. The term is not be you. Yeah.
Talk about I want to ask you about sampling. Ferrari and Jaguar switching 4 lanes, top down, Holler Out Money, anything. That's all. The whole rhythmic bass of that is you. And there's other records. Have you been? How's that whole thing worked out? Have you been compensated? Some people have and haven't. So sampling has worked out for you.
Yes. And I appreciate the art form. At first, we all were just taken aback because that hadn't happened. You had people who did covers, but you hadn't had people like, wait a minute, that's actually me playing. That's actually my stuff. And they flipped it. And, you know, at first people weren't getting paid. The industry had to catch up to this new phenomenon. But after a while, I'm like, yo, I'm feeling that. I want to be a part of it. So I did some things with 3 Times Dope, which did a remake of Weak in the Knees. And also I did some things with, let me think now. Let me get my head together. We did Funky Funky Wisdom. The guy that did How You Like Me Now.
M.O.D.
Kumo D. I'll be all right. Yeah, Kumo D. I did some work on his record, his last big record. And then I retired from the game. I completely went off into spirituality, and for 25 years I didn't do this anymore.
Let me ask one more thing. I want to get into that, but what's the relationship between hip hop and funk? What is it? Is it his father son? Is it cousins?
Yeah, it's father son. It's father son. And I dig what hip hop. Hip hop also made another generations actually, aware of our music through sampling, because you got crate diggers, and you got people like, what's the top 10 Madlib samples, and what's the top 10 Pharrell samples, blah, 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 and they go and they dig. And I've heard people say to me like, yo man, I came to you through that Jay-Z record, dude, and I heard the original Weak in the Knees, and I started getting into your career. So, that's really been cool. I dig where things have gone. I understand the side of it that, I guess when you looked at it also, you could look at it from this direction, and that is, well, but, the people who made the music, our career was done. It's like the hip hop came in, took a lot of our music, flipped it. Now they don't want us anymore. You can look at it that way too, but all things have their ear and their time. I'm just trying to prolong mine.
So you took a hiatus from pop music. Mm-hmm. Were you a minister? Did you ever before?
Yeah. I threw away all my albums, all my CDs. I didn't even own my own music. I completely immersed myself. My influence from John Coltrane, even some things that Carlos Santana, and I grew up in the church, and all of a sudden I started to feel that pull, that tug on me. You could hear it in some of my lyrics too along the way. And
the Hall of Fame albums, you can see it, you can feel it happening.
Yeah. And I wasn't afraid. Here's the thing about me, I follow my heart. I follow my heart musically, which is why I didn't make Watching You, try to make another Watching You, and I said Way Out. And then they said, okay, we'll do another Week in the Knees, and I said no, Feel So Real. And Dancing the Kid, like, oh, what's this dance music? I just follow my heart. And so I had to pursue God. I mean, I pursued God like I pursued music. I went completely in. I went all in, and so that's what I did for 25 years only.
What brought you back to doing, I guess, secular music, pop music?
My heart. I could, the Lord was starting, hey man, just bring some of that love, peace, and funky beats back out to the world, man. What have you learned in the church? I've learned a lot about the Word. I've learned a lot about the Holy Spirit. I've learned a lot of, I can talk Bible, but what have I really learned? It's very simple. God loves us. God wants us to love each other. I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours in prayer, hours and hours in the Word, preaching. But it comes down to, man, just what is the atmosphere when you show up? What comes with you? What do you bring to the room? I just want to bring some love, plain and simple. And so that's why I'm back out here doing that, hitting them joints when I sing Wait For Me and Feel So Real in them joints. It's love for the music, for the blessing to be able to do it and to give people something, that hopefully when they leave, it's like, yo, man, I feel a little better than when I came up in here. It was funky, but it was something else too.
It's funny. This is Chris Rock, so take it for what it is. I'm interviewing Steve Arrington. He's still alive? And that only because you weren't on the pop radar.
Yes, 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 yes. I mean, I disappeared. I mean, I was like vanished, you know, and then I'm just like that. It's like you're back on the scene. What's up? And it's like, hey, man, I'm just following my heart.
So let me ask you, so now you have this perspective where you didn't participate in pop music. Though your music was sampled, you were present, even if you weren't present physically making the music. Your music was around in a lot of different ways. You come back up. What do you think the world is like in terms of funk music now? This is music you were one of the the innovators of. Is it a moribund culture? Is it history? Is it evolved to something else? When you go out and you see audiences and so on, where do you see this music?
That's an interesting question. I think it's figuring itself out right now. I think that you have people coming up. You have Dane Funk is one of the guys out there who's a younger guy who's committed to doing funk music. There are a lot of white guys, white acts out there who are committed to doing funk music. I'm committed to doing new funk music, and just all types of music. I think, like all eras, it has its time where it's boom, and then it's enough time has passed now where people are revisiting things. I heard a song by Big Boy. I can't tell you what the song was, but I'm like, that's a funky bass line. So I think maybe, it may be coming back around again. I think hip hop's been funky all along. They just took some of the bass, they changed the bass and put the 808s in there and just took the bass out. And so they said it's hip hop, but it's still about some funky beats. I think everything evolves. I think the bass guitar will come back. But I'm not as tied to the past. I'm just not that tied to it. I've never been. So for me, I think funk music will do like all the other genres. It'll just keep, I think it's like the blues in a way. I think it's this generation's blues. But I just think it's starting in that. It's just starting to be classic music the way blues is now. It's sort of strange about funk because I felt like it didn't evolve. Hip hop came and just cut it off. So in that way, I can't say that's good or bad. That's just culture. That's just what happened. I think it just marries. I think it will embrace the electronics. It will embrace this fast culture that we live in and keep going.
What other, it's interesting because I don't know if you've listened to any of the Brazilian ballet funk, they call it. Have you listened? There's a whole, they call it funk. It's obviously inspired by what came out here. Sounds different in certain ways, but the root of it's like the root of this music. You go back to Africa, Afrobeat. Yeah, I mean it's informed a lot of different things and it mutates.
Yes.
With every culture. Could you tell a little bit about Dame Funk, because he's one of the few younger black musicians we've actually found who's really like philosophically in that space. What's his distinction as a what do you think he brings to the table?
He loves funk music. He just loves it. That's his thing. I think his interest is bringing it to a new generation. And I think his interest is in reaching back to other artists to say, hey man, I appreciate what you've done. And because he just did his first album. So it's hard to say where he goes from here and what he does. But he champions this music. He's really into it. And, he hit me up and said, hey, man, why don't you do a 12-inch with me? And I said, oh, okay, let's do a 12-inch. I was happy that he was interested in the music. And so we've become close, and he's doing some production on my new record, along with gonna do some things with Quick, DJ Quick, and some Cat Twilight Tone. LA is very interested in funk music, and has been with G Funk, and I think sort of Dame would be a part of that culture and that understanding, but not rapping over top of it, you know.
It's interesting that LA. That's what I found. I started traveling to LA a lot and going to these parties. You know, early 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's funny to say it now, but yeah, early 21st century. And there were all these little pockets of this party. They're playing real groove, or they're playing funk, or they're playing real rootsy R&B. Whatever reason, LA has these different cultures, these scenes that I think that the Dame Funk is part of, and the Stones Throw people are part of, that I don't find in New York, let's say, or a lot of other cities.
Yes.
You have any theories on that? I'm trying to figure it out myself.
I think there's a new movement going on, and I think it's happening in LA. I think Stones Throw is a part of it. That's why I decided to sign with Stones Throw. There's a guy out there, Madlib, who is he's John Faddis, his nephew. Flying Lotus, who is the nephew of Alice Coltrane. He's doing some great work. LA right now is very progressive. They are searching. They are trying things. A cat Raz G is doing some great work. Hudson Mohawk, Sam I Am, and of course the great Jay Dilla, who's passed. Donuts, that's a great record. He's done some great work as well. LA sort of feels like the way Dayton felt in the 70s, with people not being afraid to try and do different things. And that's why I've connected with that scene, to try and open up and say, hey, I want to be a part of this. Sort of like a second movement. I was part of the Dayton movement, and now Stones Throw is a very progressive label, as well as bringing music from more history-based music and propelling that, and giving that an opportunity to be heard by a younger audience. I mean, my first time back for my first week back, we did the do-over, and I've been gone 25 years, and they're like, I thought we were going to go to LA and do a video, and they say, listen, man, we want you to sing. I'm like, I haven't sang these songs forever. I don't even know if I know all the words, and I'm practicing the words and stuff like that. We get to the do-over. Steve Arrington, yeah, they brought me all the way from Ohio, and I'm thinking, I'm hoping I'm going to remember these joints. And we hit Just a Touch of Love, and the whole place, they knew the lead, they knew the background vocals, and these are 20 and 30-year-old kids. I'm going, whoa! Ended up, we did about 3 or 4 shows where I just did surprise guest appearances, one of them being Quick's Groove. And the next thing I know, there's a whole new generation who's loving this music. And I've been enjoying that, playing, to the crowds who grew up with me, doing that as well. Getting down with Cameo and guys like that. And then with these new guys, I've been kicking it with the DJs. I was in New York, as a matter of fact, Brooklyn, where I did my first DJ set. Yeah, I did a DJ set.
What club?
Oh, sheesh.
Brooklyn Bowl?
It was in... I'm sorry.
How did I miss that? Now I'm mad now.
I can't remember.
Come on home turf, baby.
Yeah, I did my first DJ set. I can't remember the club now, but it was about a year and a half ago.
Let me tell you, man. There is a substantial, let's say, a big cult of people in their 20s and 30s who are really into all of that, and it's a global. It's not just New York. Have you been to London yet?
No, I'm on my way. We'll be going in October.
It's going to be crazy. Guaranteed.
I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be crazy. London, you don't even know, man. It's going to be off the chain. They love some art, and they understand the history and the now. They're very interesting musically, I think, the British.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you're gonna be. It's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be the Beatles and stuff.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to it. I really am. I'm so excited to be back, Nelson. I'll be honest with you. I'm having so much fun, man. I mean, like right now, I'm like, yeah, I'm having a good time.
Okay, let's do one more thing about Dayton.
Mm.
Okay, now in retrospect, we can look back. What do you think the contribution of this region, not just Slave and Ohio, but it seems like late 70s and the 80s, there was an amazing amount of quality bands. You don't see bands like this anymore. What do you think the legacy of that era gave to the world of music?
Innovation, because none of the bands sounded alike. You don't have like two or three producers like you had in Motown. It was a producer-driven music. Or you go to Stax and you've got these particular staff writers and producers who are pretty much running that scene. Or in Minneapolis, where you have the Mighty Prince, whose stamp was so much on the music until maybe Jimmy Jam and those guys sort of created their own lane. Dayton, the Ohio players started it, but we didn't follow them. So you have all this unique creative music that really changed the world, that we made a serious stamp on the world of innovation in a small town to be innovative and unique is powerful with just some guys who started in the garage doing talent shows, Battle of the Bands. It's not an education driven scene, yet there are people who know the music and who understand what they're playing. But this is an emotional, heart driven scene that doesn't come from a producer. It just comes from cats, man, who just didn't give a flip and just say, we're going to do it our way. If it goes woo, woo, and you hear the fret noise, so you hear the fret noise. Or if Sugarfoot's, oh, child, oh, girl, so what? It is what it is. And I'm going, AI. Everybody just did their own thing. And so the world said, we feel it.
Let me ask you, there's a sound that people associate with funk singers. I'm talking about Sugarfoot, you, even Larry Blackmon, what he did with Cameo and stuff. Where does that sound come from?
It's a marriage between blues and the church. It's bluesy, like to me, I used to say, man, Sugarfoot is a great blues singer across R&B funky music. He blended it into something you'd never heard before because the package. But if you break it down, it's like, wow, man, I hear like some Hound Dog Taylor. I'm hearing some, really someone like Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf, not sounding like them, but the echoes of those emotions. When Foots went, oh girl, it had a blues base to it, and plus the thing about Foots is this dude was a lyricist, and his bluesiness in his voice with that jazzy funky thing they had going was like no other, man. And I think Junie and Riffin, I don't know. Dayton singers, we don't get enough love either. We was bringing it. Johnny Wilder. Mark Wood.
I didn't realize how much Lionel Richie took from Sugarfoot.
Oh yeah. Oh man, everybody.